On to question 2. I'll call upon Mr Moorhouse again.
Thank you, Mr President. I would like to ask the Minister for Infrastructure what procedures are in place to minimise any negative impact on the occupier of private property of work done by his department to improve or alter drainage networks.
Call on the Minister for Infrastructure to reply.
Thank you, Mr President. Mr President, drainage is a broad term meaning defence against water and alleviation of flooding, including the improvement of natural and artificial channels used for those purposes. My department carries out improvement works on drainage networks for 2 main reasons: to mitigate serious community flood risks in its capacity as Drainage Authority under the 2013 Flood Risk Management Act, and to protect its infrastructure from water, for example, the drainage on highways and railways. Drainage improvements carried out by the Department are aimed at maintaining or improving standards of protection from water to achieve benefits for our community. In many cases, there are direct benefits for private landowners through flood risk reduction. Initiatives to support the management of impacts include flood mapping. The Department flood maps illustrate high flood risk areas to inform decision making. Flood mapping has been carried out to identify the risk of flooding island-wide from rivers, surface waters and the sea, and the information is published on our Flood Hub web pages. Thank you, Mr President.
Supplementary, Mr Moorhouse.
Thank you, Mr President. Thank you, Minister. In the last 12 months, how many people reported water damage to their property as a consequence of DOI activity or inactivity? Thank you.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr President. In the last 12 months, we've had 52 incidences of flooding, and 13 of those have resulted in property being damaged, as far as we're aware of. As to whose responsibility they are, I can't say. We've had lots of flooding, certainly in the last month. We've seen a lot of flooding, and some of that will be down to maybe drainage works that haven't been, ditches and drains haven't been cleared, but we have a huge excess of water in the last couple of months, and I suggest a lot of those 52 incidents have been during that. As to whose fault they are, I would put that down to nature, a lot of it, Mr President.
Supplementary, Mr Moorhouse.
Thank you, Mr President. Thank you, Minister. Just going a bit further into that last answer, is it possible for the Department could place a greater emphasis on actually maintaining existing ditches and drainage systems? In 2021, this maintenance in some areas appears to be quite minimal or even non-existent. Thank you.
Minister to reply.
Mr President, I'm happy to say that probably over the last 2 years with COVID, the maintenance hasn't been what it should have been, and that's totally understandable in those circumstances. I am looking to improve it next year, over the next year, well, from now if you like, but certainly over the next year when we get our budget for the next year. And we will be looking to take on board any comments and any examples that members give us where we might not know about. We'll be happy to hear about those and pick up on those.
Supplementary, Mr Thomas.
Thank you, Mr President. Does the Minister agree with me that the Flood Risk Management Act law in itself is complicated and that the procedures around it are complicated and the responsibilities are complicated? So does he agree with me that it would be a good idea to actually work on a public information and education campaign about the various responsibilities and legal obligations in this area?
Minister to reply.
Mr President, I would say that's a great idea.
Supplementary, Mr Moorhouse.
Thank you, Mr President. Is any form of simulation carried out, in addition to the flood mapping that was mentioned in the first answer, to actually assess the potential impact of any changes on private property before the work's actually done? And this section of DOI appears to be under huge stress. How significant is the waiting list for this type of work to be done? And how many drainage improvement schemes are expected to be carried out in the next 12 months? Thank you very much.
Minister's reply.
Thank you, Mr President. I'm told that the Department has not carried out... sorry, that's the wrong one. The Department has a record of approximately 100 flood-prone locations, which it prioritises as resources become available. Highway Services have appointed a highways drainage design engineer and support technician as well, this year to devote more specialist resources into that area. There has been a substantial number of schemes and design work undertaken since the appointment of these two people, and hopefully we'll see the benefit from their work in the future. A second part of his question, I can't remember. Sorry.
Yeah. In terms of the amount of these schemes that can be completed in a calendar year, how many would the Minister expect to be possible? And also in terms of the actual simulation, is there any actual micro-level stuff done? So if, for example, did work on the Cobb Glen Road, would they actually look at the impact on housing? Is it all done from the basic flood mapping technique that was mentioned earlier? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I thank the honourable member for repeating that. With regards to the Colby Glen Road, I mean, there's basic maintenance been done there, so there's no mapping or no. There's been no significant design changes there, so those works would have been done there. It was just basically maintenance that was done, and I'm happy to take up that issue with you later on. The department will investigate where flooding impacts are serious on people's properties and things. But again, you know, we try to, when it is bad, we are out there looking for it as well as trying to fix it at the same time. But again, I would ask members, if they have issues with their constituents, to bring those to our notice. I did that 3 weeks ago, and I'm sure other members did as well. We are more than happy to take on board people's say examples of what's going on or advice on what's going on in their area.
Supplementary, Mrs. Kane.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm interested in the Minister's comment that it's nature rather than anything the department has undertaken that might lead to additional flooding. Is he aware, as I am, correspondents, at least one property in Laxey suffering flooding never previously had flooding despite the 2015, the 2019 floods since mitigation work done by his department? And will he confirm that the department will work with householders who suffer flooding potentially as a result of flood works done by his department in order to ensure that all properties are protected from flooding? And it might not just be the nature, it might not just be the excessive rain where water courses are being changed by works and drainage works that his department is undertaking.
Minister to reply.
Yes, Mr. President, I'm more than happy to agree with the honourable member who's just resumed his seat and say, while it's nature in the first place that's causing this problems, obviously there's issues of maintenance that haven't occurred, not only in the last 2 years, but probably before that. And she mentions Laxey as an example there. The department has probably spent the majority of its resources up there in the last couple of years trying to resolve that. It was a huge issue, and we don't want to see that again. But that also can happen on any of the 7 main rivers around the island, so we need to make sure that everybody in the island is covered.